Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our refresher training course on FERPA facts, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So just a reminder of what FERPA is all about. It is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act and a federal law that protects the confidentiality of student information. FERPA protects personally confidential information from students' educational records from disclosure without written consent from a parent or eligible student, and that is a student who is 18 years of age, unless an exception to that consent requirement applies. Later on towards the end of our training today, I will talk about what those exceptions might look like, but we're going to focus mainly on what FERPA looks like in the virtual educational environment and how we can make sure we keep ourselves and our students safe and in compliance with the law. So basically, the law provides the right of parents and adult-age students to inspect and receive a copy of student records, the right to deny access to others, specifically those outside the school system, with some exceptions, a process to correct errors, including a hearing, the right to opt out of military recruitment, the right to opt out of disclosure of a student's directory information, and a complaint process handled by the Family Compliance Office of the United States Department of Education. So for FERPA and the digital realm, and what does it look like and how are we using it, who's getting the information in our virtual education setting. So some places other than ourselves and school personnel that are collecting data, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, educational tech companies, and educational apps that we use are all third-party corporations, entities, whatever you want to call them, that could be possibly collecting our students' data. So how does that affect our school? Basically, laws covering the collection of student data should also apply to service providers such as Google to protect student data the same as the school is required to do. Schools need to be aware of what is in a vendor contract and hold vendors to the contract agreements concerning student data collection. One thing we need to be aware of is that our online vendors, such as the apps that we use and websites that we use in our classes with our students that offer free services, could be mining data for third parties. And if that's the case, we could end up in violation of those FERPA regulations. So it's very important that we are paying attention to what we're using in our classrooms and what their privacy and privacy protection policies are. So some tips for you to remain FERPA compliant. First of all, know the law. It's your job to learn, understand, and comply with FERPA. You should know that what data exists in educational records, who can view the records, and the limits for sharing data. Make sure you're choosing FERPA compliant vendors. Anytime you use a third-party vendor, make sure that they have privacy and data collection policies that ensure FERPA compliance. Another way to keep data safe is to make sure you're encrypting your files and emails. When you encrypt your files and emails, that means you need a decryption key to be able to access that. So that's like with your password protections and things like that. And this does add an extra layer of protection, which protects your data, especially if your computer is lost or stolen. We often travel to different locations for professional development and and to hold our live sessions. And that does mean transporting our school laptops with us. So you want to make sure that you have multiple layers of encryption on your computer, using those password protection items to make sure that people cannot access your computer if it is accidentally left behind or stolen. And then, of course, continue your FERPA training. Every year we're required to go back over our FERPA regulations to make sure that we're all aware of the law and what it constitutes. So do make sure you complete all of the training from K-12 and ISKS to avoid any unintentional violations or consequences. One thing we do have to worry about, and a lot of questions come up about the use of webcams and the recording of students and student information in our virtual classrooms. We need to make sure that all of our students are aware that recordings for educational purposes could be considered educational records. So anything we record in class could be considered an educational record and fall under the protection of FERPA. Some ways to help protect ourselves is to remind students using webcams should be aware of their environment and avoid accidentally sharing personal information or images. In addition to make sure they have on school appropriate clothing, we also want them to be aware of what's going on around them so that they are not accidentally sharing personal information. We also need to remind students that live sessions are recorded and sharing personal information is a violation of school policy. One way of doing that is including a written warning with your slides, reminding students we are recording live sessions for educational purposes, and that during our live sessions, they are not allowed to share personal information such as their address, their phone number, email addresses, their gamer information to these different game sites. None of that should be shared in a live session because there's always the chance that the information is being recorded. And we know with technology today, it's very easy to take that information, even if it is in a private setting, and share it publicly. So include that written warning on your slides, reminding students that we are recording live sessions for those purposes. As you can see on the slide here, I do have an example from my own class. This is the slide my students see when they enter the classroom, and that warning is located on that first slide. And every day before I start the recording, I remind the students that we are recording. And of course, if something does come up in a session that is being recorded, alert administrators if students are sharing that private information during your live sessions. And also remember that we do have the ability to hide and delete recordings if we do see something during our sessions that could be considered against the FERPA regulations. All right, like I said, there are some exceptions to FERPA restrictions. So basically, you know, in the context of school safety, FERPA makes exceptions to its restrictions on data sharing should knowledge of such information be necessary to protect the health or safety of students or other persons in connection with an emergency. As teachers, most of you probably won't have to face that, but there could be times that data you collected might be needed in order to protect students or other persons, either their health or their safety. And anytime though that a request for your personal data or data that you've collected on students, anytime you get a request for that, always make sure that you contact our administration or the K-12 legal department for advice before releasing any student data. So just as a reminder, what kinds of data are considered educational records? Some examples would be the student's grades, immunization and health records maintained by the school, disciplinary records, student progress reports, academic or physical testing results, grade point average, and attendance records. So any time that you are trying to share data or put it into an email, make sure that you are hiding any identifiers that could provide anybody that's viewing that information to who the student is that you are referencing. So make sure names are covered up, student identification numbers are covered up, and never share any of these documents with unauthorized personnel. All right, so we do have in our SharePoint files the ISKS FERPA General Guidelines. Excuse me. And of course, Insight School of Kansas, Kansas Virtual Academy staff members and teachers are responsible for complying with FERPA requirements at all times. You can access those guidelines anytime you need to by going to our shared SharePoint, the K-12 SharePoint, and click on the Operational Guidelines and Procedures tab. And in there, you will be able to review the FERPA guidelines and policies to make sure that you know the law and that you are keeping your classroom communications and data FERPA compliant. All right, everyone, thank you so much for your time and attention today. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns about FERPA compliance, please reach out to your administrators or to the K-12 legal department. Again, thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.